If you know anything about web development, you're going to think this is just the coolest thing. And if you don't, you might think that I just spent $30 on garbage, but I'm so excited about it. And so I wanted to make a video just sort of long form exploring it together and talking about why I think it's so cool. So if you like videos where people talk about very niche things in a lot of detail, this one's for you. Some background context before we get started. We're talking about the history of CSS colors. So in the 1980s, MIT was developing the X Windows system, and this initially started in version 10, X10, where they included 69 basic colors. In 1989, Paul Raveling of the Information Sciences Institute at the University of Southern California, he added a bunch new colors and he tuned a lot of the old ones because all of the old ones, they were for this really specific monitor. I'll put it up on the screen. It looks like this. But on the newer HP monitors that people were using, these colors looked kind of bad. So Paul took it upon himself and he tuned all the colors to his own monitor. He also added a bunch of new colors, including a lot of off-whites. You can see on this RGB distribution of the colors he added that there's this cluster of whites and lights and subtle colors, and he did this because he wanted to add more background options. It's actually really stressful for our eyes to read black text on pure white, so having all these options would really open things up for people. Paul set off looking for a collection of off-white colors to add, and he wrote to the American National Standards Institute, ANSI. He sent them $16 for a specification. And if you're curious, like I was, I calculated it. $16 then is like $40 today. And they never responded. They never sent him the specification or responded to his follow-up mail. He was rightfully kind of miffed about this, and he wrote, "ANSI happily gobbled my $16 without sending the specification I ordered. Then they ignored my follow-up letter. Nuts to ANSI and ANSI standards." So instead, he got samples from Sinclair Paints and he matched them as best he could. Now, Sinclair Paints doesn't exist anymore, but their off-white colors were really popular in the 1970s, which was both coming off the bold colors of the 60s and part of the standard of American track housing that was being built, because these off-whites were pretty good at hiding stuff like fingerprints and smoke marks on the walls of these apartment buildings that were being built. So on eBay, I found an original color chart of their lights and off-whites. I was so relieved to see it came with a do not bend on it. I was worried it was going to be kind of messed up when I got it, but thankfully it looks just fine. It came with a sturdy cardboard backing too. I did block out the name of the eBay seller who sent it to me, but I did email him to explain why this meant so much to me and how grateful I was to have it. And he explained to me that he got this in an estate sale in LA. There's just a market for people buying vintage paint swatches like this as home decor. I can see why. It is very, very cool, but obviously this to me has a much deeper meaning as a piece of web history. I'll give you a close-up of it in a minute and we can go over the colors that are in this chart, but it's just so cool. There is some wear, and again, I'll show you that up close in a minute, which isn't too surprising. My guess for the origin of this is 1970s or 80s. The code that Paul added was in 1989. I did try to email Paul Raveling as well. I have no idea if he's still on the internet or checking his website. It looks like he hasn't posted anything since 2017, so I'm not really expecting a response to that email, but if I get one, of course, I will let you know. So at the very latest, this would be from the late 80s. I don't have really any proof of it being earlier than that, but oh gosh. Inside, it has all the paint swatches, and let's switch to a close-up view so I can show you things in detail. Okay, so I've swapped you to an overhead view here. I still have my microphone right next to me, so you should be able to hear me just the same. I do have an overhead light on as well, which is what's causing this glare, but it's not as reflective in the inside, so hopefully that'll let us see some of the colors better together. Like I said, there is some wear. I don't know if this is rust or just stains or what. I need to look into really getting this framed professionally, but also if there's anything I can do to make sure that deterioration doesn't continue, because I think this is just such a neat piece of web history and I'd love to keep it and display it for as long as I can. So here it is on the inside. You might already recognize some of these names. I'll put, as we talk about them, I'll put the hex code sort of down here, how it exists currently in CSS, so you can compare. But I wanted to go through and talk through them It just sort of one by one. So we have white here up first, and it looks to be just a pure white, which of course already existed in the original 69 colors of the X window system. Interestingly though, when they first added white to that, it wasn't a pure 255, 255, 255. I think it was like 252, 252, 252. I think that was because of limitations of monitors at the time, but that's just a guess. I don't know. It was eventually updated to be, 255, 255, 255 as we know it today. But if anybody knows more about why early monitors struggled with, intense RGB values like that, I would love to hear it. So this one, just a default, not being added as part of Paul Ravling's 1989 update. But next we have Snowdrift. And at first I thought this one wasn't included in the update, but it was in a color called Snow. So Snow was added. Snow exists. It does look similar enough to me that I think the name was just changed. And this color did inspire Snow, but not necessarily being called Snowdrift. Next up is Linen. This was also added really just as you see it here. I'm worried on my camera it looks a bit less warm, but I think it's just such a lovely neutral. Same as Floral White. I really like Floral White. It just, I don't even know how to explain it, that it has a bit more life than just plain white, because it really just seems kind of like a gray or white, but also it seems more like baby's breath to me. So I'm really, really a fan of that. Next here we have Old Lace, which also made the cut exactly as is. This one is a little bit smudged, but you can still see it. It's just lovely. The first one we had that didn't make the cut is this one, Cottage White. And I don't know why. Couple possibilities. Very possible that this is not the color chart that Paul Ravling was referring to. Sinclair Interiors, they were big at the time, Sinclair Paint, and they had a lot of color charts like this. So it's possible that he was looking at a different one, that this wasn't here. But it's also possible that it just looked kind of similar to Linen. These look similar to me. I'm not sure if it just didn't add as much value, but Cottage White did not make the cut. Antique White though, this one did make the cut. This is in the CSS standard. I think it's neat. It's not just a gray, it's like a warm gray. And then even warmer than that, we have Blanched Almond, which I love the name Blanched Almond. That's sort of our first one that's like playful and like a neat reference to something. Blanching, if you don't know, it's a cooking technique where you sort of briefly boil or steam something for a few minutes and then you shock it with cold water. So I've done it before with vegetables like broccoli to sort of preserve it if you buy it in bulk and won't eat it, because then you can freeze it and it preserves some of the texture. But when you blanch a nut, like a pistachio or an almond, the skin softens and it becomes easy to remove. So a blanched almond is really just an almond that has had the skin removed. So it's this lovely beige color, just like the raw meat of an almond. Here, Imperial White did not make the cut. And again, I don't know if that's just because this wasn't in the original color chart or because it seemed too similar to Antique White. These, I mean, they're all kind of similar because they all are, subtle lights and whites. But Imperial White did not make the cut. Same with Laguna Dune, which I think is kind of a shame because I really do enjoy saying Laguna Dune. Mint Cream though, Mint Cream did make the cut and I think it's just lovely. It reminds me of mint ice cream. And I love that this one made the cut as Mint Cream and not just mint, because I think it easily could have been mint and that still would have been a very faithful name for this color. Honeydew also did make the cut, just as you see it here. And I do think it's that pale, lovely sort of melon. So Honeydew in exactly as you'd expect it. Bisque did make the cut, both in that 1989 update and in current CSS standard, but I don't know what the name Bisque refers to, because I think it could be one of two things. It could either be Bisque like the soup, which is a lovely soup. I really enjoy Bisque. It's a soup where shellfish shells are cooked in the broth and then they're ground up and added, which makes this really marvelous kind of velvety texture. And I do really think that this looks like a pale broth soup. This could be a very light lobster bisque. Or bisque can refer to unglazed but fired pottery. And honestly, it kind of looks like that too, that sort of beige, clay, unglazed. I think it could be either one. I don't lean towards one explanation more than the other. Moccasin also made the cut in the current CSS standard, and I think it does kind of look like very, very fresh, like shearling or uncured leather. So very cool. Navajo white. Okay, this color, it did make the update and it is part of the current CSS standard. This color has been criticized for having racial undertones, similar to the color Indian red, which was also a Crayola crayon, but then later renamed so it wasn't referencing a skin color. But Navajo white is actually not referencing a skin color. It's said to be a reference to the background of the Navajo Nation flag. Coming up here on our next row, we have corn silk. Corn silk did make the cut. And corn silk, that's the silky fibers on top of an ear of corn. And a fun fact that I learned is that each fiber of corn silk on an ear of corn actually comes back to a single kernel and helps that single kernel get fertilized. So as many corn silks as they are, that's what sort of makes the corn kernels corn kernels. So I think that's really cool. Corn silk made the cut. And then lemon chiffon. I am obsessed with the color lemon chiffon. It's so yummy and sweet, and the name is so just playful. Can I get that in focus there for a better view for you? There, we're back in focus now. Peach puff, similarly, I think that's a pastry, but it's just so sweet and light, and I can absolutely see the value that these two bring to being, window backgrounds where you don't want black text on stark white. You want something a little warmer, a little sweeter, a little more playful. And the fact that the names lemon chiffon and peach puff are still in CSS now, it feels so whimsical to me, and I love that these made the cut. Apricot ice did not make the cut. That one, so sad, too bad. Sorry, apricot ice. But papaya whip did. And that makes my list here of top 3 names, because it's just, what a delightful name. What a delightful color. Papaya whip is one of those that when I was learning CSS and, first seeing these named colors, I really got curious, like what in the world is papaya whip? But this is where it comes from. Moving to the next row, we have lavender blush. This one, to me, the way that Paul added it in the CSS standard, it looks a lot pinker to me. Here, it looks a bit more like a traditional lavender, but lavender was added in the CSS standard later as a different color in a separate commit, not from Paul or from John Thomas. So Paul Raveling made this big update in 1989, but then later there was this other engineer, John Thomas, and he added a bunch of colors based on Crayola crayons. So as far as I can tell, lavender, just lavender, not lavender blush. It wasn't part of the initial 69. It wasn't part of Paul Raveling's update from Sinclair Paint. And it wasn't part of John Thomas's update from Crayola crayons. It seems like lavender was just added in a separate commit as lavender. But Paul did add lavender blush. And again, tell me what you think. But I think here in this guide, it looks a little more plain lavender. And the way it was added in CSS looks a little more lavender blushy. Although, of course, these colors were all tuned to a 1989 HP monitor, so it's possible on that monitor that lavender blush really did look like this lavender blush. Misty Rose made the cut, but Pink Petal didn't make the cut, interestingly. My guess is because pink was already included in the original 69 colors in X10s, and with Paul's changes when he added and tuned a bunch of colors, he also added a bunch of shades of colors that already existed. So in that update, he added light pink and pale pink. And I do think you can argue that the pale pink he added in 1989 was somewhat similar to Pink Petal, but that pale pink ended up being cut later in a later commit when he combined some of the pinks and when hot pink was added. That happened a lot later. Cherub didn't make the cut. I do think it's kind of similar to colors we already have here, like Peach Puff, but I am saddened that we didn't get the name Cherub just because it does make me think of like rosy cheeks. I do think it's a lovely image and a lovely name. Seashell made the cut. That's in the CSS standard. Azure Sky, I think this is another case like Snowdrift where it got added but the name got shortened, because in that update there is just Azure, not Azure Sky. So I think that the sky just kind of got dropped here. Now Alice Blue, this is such an interesting color. Alice Blue got added and it is in the CSS standard. I heard a rumor that this color is a reference to Alice in Wonderland. And Alice in Wonderland, she does wear a blue dress in the 1951 animated movie and the 2010 remake, where it really does look like this shade of Alice blue. But it's not a reference to Alice in Wonderland. It's actually a reference to Alice Roosevelt, who was the daughter of Teddy Roosevelt. And she became a fashion icon when she was 17 at her social debut in 1902. She wore a blue gown. It sparked this whole trend and even a song, Alice Blue Gown. And this shade of blue really became associated with her, very specifically her, and the shades of gowns that she would always wear. She was sort of a wild child. She would smoke cigarettes, she would stay out partying. She even owned a snake named Emily Spinach, and that fact brings me a lot of joy. Morning Mist did not make the cut, but honestly, this one seems very close to White Smoke, so I think it just got cut for others being too similar. White Smoke did, and I really like this shade. I think, again, just bringing white just a few values off from a pure white adds so much character to it, because White Smoke, it's not just white. It is this lovely bluish, greenish, grayish. I can picture it as, smoke that's coming off a candle I just blew out, and I absolutely adore it. Now here, Gainsborough is another one where the origin of the name is sort of debated. I have seen rumors that it was based on the Gainsborough hat, which was popular in British fashion in the 18th century, but I've also seen rumors that it was named for Thomas Gainsborough, who was an English painter also in the 18th century. And I've looked at some of his work, and I think that you could argue that he did mix this shade of gray quite often, but honestly, I don't know where it comes from. And there are a bunch of locations now also named Gainsborough, and the spelling between some Gainsboroughs and Gainsborough is slightly off. So this one, I really don't know where it comes from. But again, I really like it. It was added in this update, and it made it into the CSS standard. I think it's a lovely, soft, cool gray. And that's it. Those are all the colors in this color chart, and those were the colors that were added in the update. Like I said, he did tune and rename some existing ones, but we know that he got the names from Sinclair Paints, and I mean, given that this is almost all of them were included in this update and explain where almost all of the names came from, I mean, how cool is that? Here's another view of the back. Just explaining Sinclair at the time, what they were able to mix and the color names and how they get mixed in those different textures and finishes. Sinclair Paint, I believe, was bought out by another company and then another company after that. So I'm not sure who technically owns this now, but a lot of these colors exist in different paint companies that you may have seen. Like off the top of my head, I know Lemon Chiffon has a Sherwin-Williams paint color that you can find and buy if you love some of these subtle lights and whites. But I just think this is so cool. I'm hoping to take it to get it custom framed and just put an anti-glare glass over this and get it matte, maybe a black matte on the background to make these really pop and maybe display in my office. I think it's such a cool piece of history. I've also been meaning to do a high quality scan of this whole thing, maybe to upload if people would like to see any colors and details or use it for anything. It's just so cool, and I hope you found it interesting too.